Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, my next guest took 5 years to write this book, The Fruits of Graft. It's about the Great Depression then and what's coming for us now. His contention in this book is that they engineered the Great Depression, and hey, they may be doing it again for a reset. He's also an attorney who's argued cases in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. Yay! So a financial and a legal expert, Wayne Jett. Wayne Jett, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. I'm excited.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Greg.
I only do about 100 interviews a year on USA Watch. So I do them 2 a week, and I got my weekly news wrap up, whatever. So I want to place people in the right time at the right place. And boy, you are an expert on the Fed, and you've written articles about the Federal Reserve. And boy, is the Federal Reserve looking bizarro, weird, desperate, kooky, crazy. They're going to start QE and money printing, and they've been out talking. That's not what I think. They've had people out talking about they're going to start QE when the economy gets bad. They're going to slash interest rates. They promised us, pal. Where's the Fed right now? What should people, you think, wow, this is good news. The Fed's going to lower interest rates and print some money. Is it good news?
Well, the Fed is where it always has been. That is, it's the outpost of a foreign power that is controlling our economy, controlling much of our politics and our financial future. It's an instrument of the Rothschild global cabal, always has been. That's exactly the way it was established in 1913. It is a Rothschild bank, essentially majority controlled by them. The fact that we have a so-called board of governors appointed by politicians really makes no difference in the ownership. The day-to-day activities, operations of the Fed are conducted in New York at the New York Fed. The open market operations is what they call it. But the Board of Governors, as far as I can tell, and I certainly don't have any inside information, but is more or less window dressing to make it appear that they have something to do with what happens at the Fed.
Yeah, but with them announcing all this money printing, they're announcing. They're actually been out. They've had their Fed governors out there announcing, their mouthpieces out there announcing money printing. And of course, Jerome Powell, he's talking about cutting interest rates. We have 2.25 points to cut. I mean, we're right back to where we were 10 years ago, are we not?
Well, it's the same old story that inflation is our friend and is going to be good for us, and this is the way we should be doing things. It makes things more prosperous. It makes the dollar less and less valuable by the day. That is, all of the earning power that people have put into the dollars that they've earned in the past will be worth less tomorrow than they are today, and they certainly are diminishing quickly enough already.
So people should be worried that the Fed is now going back to, oh yeah, this didn't work. I mean, basically what they're saying is that for 10 years they said this was going to save us. We're going to have quantitative easing, money printing, and we're going to have, lower these interest rates to zero and screw savers. And but it didn't work, did it? I mean, right?
No. The Fed is not our friend, and it's not our savior. But I've got feelings of optimism these days because we do have leadership now that is actually in the process, I believe, of taking on not just the Fed, but the entire ownership of the Fed, the deep state globally. The deep state is really not the same thing as the global cabal. I think what is occurring presently, and the reason for all of the storm, you can call it, that is going on in our nation, our government, is because for the first time in history, the global cabal is actually being confronted, not just within one nation, but internationally.
Wow.
With the prospect of actually uprooting and destroying it. And that is the only solution to it. It's not possible for any country to defeat it and let it exist every place else. They're going to come back for you. That's what happened to the Russians during the 20th century when 60 million of their people were murdered by insurgency financed by this same cabal and executed to the nth degree there. The other Christian nation, unfortunately one that speaks a very different language from ours, but otherwise having a great deal in common with us, it may surprise people that the Tsar, who was kidnapped and murdered with his entire family by these Bolshevik insurgents there.
Communist.
I don't really even refer to them as communists. They were the so-called New Republic man, the kind of person that has no morals. They were operatives.
The Democrats.
Designed to accomplish the objectives of the global elite. And the global elite has spelled out their objectives very plainly in English. They are to completely destroy the middle class, which is defined as every human being capable of supporting himself and his family, or herself and her family. Everyone capable of supporting themselves, they want exterminated. They have said so. That is their plan. Since 1901, it's been in plain English. They have executed that plan throughout the 20th century worldwide. Certainly, they've done their best in America, but we have been an instrument in some respects of that program, the misuse of our military force, particularly in the last 50, 60, 70 years. And that's really too bad.
Well, let's come
in so many respects.
Let's come back to Donald Trump. Wow, you haven't heard a president say, I'm totally opposite of the Fed. He's just out this last week saying the same thing. I totally disagree with the Fed policies. I told they raised rates too fast. They killed off the economy. John Williams said the same thing. He said, well, we actually really did have a recovery until the Fed kept raising rates and selling their junk that they bought from their criminal member bankers, the mortgage-backed securities. And you just wrote a paper about two debts, but I digress. Donald Trump is sending these messages about the Fed for a reason. Why? Why is he saying, I totally disagree with the Fed and just dogging him? The Fed is my enemy. I mean, he's been saying all kinds of stuff, not just recently. But why is Donald Trump, in your estimation, dogging the Fed? I think they should be dogged. Go ahead.
You have to change the narrative away from this thing that the Fed is our carefully considered, very, very sophisticated, highly educated economists are carefully guiding the chart of our economic progress and so forth. That is the big lie. It has never been true. They are mercantilists, the Keynesian economists that completely control the Fed and have since the Fed came into being, at least when they started calling it Keynesianism in the mid-30s and the 40s.
Maynard Keynes.
John Maynard Keynes simply had taught classical economics at Cambridge University for years. His father before him had taught the same in the same professorship. And John Maynard Keynes, the son, switched allegiances. He went to the dark side. He went to mercantilism. And he wrote this trashy book. I mean, I cannot say a good thing about his the book of 1936 that supposedly made him so famous, that essentially began to tout the same things as the mercantilists, except doing it all under the false pretense that it was all for the good of the little man, the little common man.
Total lie.
When the mercantilists had always hated the common man, had always hated any kind of a vote for people to say what their government's all about. And certainly they said so in a manifesto in 1901.
Well, wait. When you say mercantilist, we should just think insert Fed.
Mercantilist amounts to what I would call kingmakers. The kingmakers who put the king on the throne. The king rules, but they pull the strings from behind the scenes. They make all the money by doing all of the economics, all of the merchandising and so forth and so on. The academics of the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries called it mercantilism because it was a respectable name that sort of obfuscated what was really going on.
Which was?
Which was the kingmakers were making all the money by, and also not just by selling goods and services, but by instigating every war that they wanted in order to make sure they controlled every country, and also in order to make money on ammunition, weapons, and so forth, and also to kill people to keep the population down. They've never wanted a large population of other human beings that they regarded as having claims upon parts of the earth that might be someday superior to their own. They simply want two classes. They said so in 1901 in a little book that got the author of that little book not only lifetime fame and fortune as a respected academic, but promptly an almost immediate invitation as the honored guest of Theodore Roosevelt's White House. That was H.G. Wells. He was invited back numerous times to other presidents. Calvin Coolidge didn't invite him, but FDR and Eleanor had him in the White House for extended stays, weeks at a time, at least 3 times during his administration.
They were the original progressives, which they loved, which the Nazis called themselves. The National Socialists called themselves progressives. Well, top-down management.
Let me tell you about Wells's actual rhetoric in that case. Not just rhetoric, he was being ascribed and telling the story of what the plan was. And that little book was simply to go to the inside people, like presidents and like kings and so forth, the ones who were going to get the word from them as to what the plan is, so we execute this thing. And what he said was that this thing called democracy and voting and all this sort of thing, a representative government, really meaning a republic, has gotten out of hand. The middle class has become completely unwieldy. If we let them go any further, we're never going to be able to get our two-class system back. And that's what we've got to go back to, a two-class system of rulers, ourselves, and our servants. That's all we want. And we're going to have to exterminate much of the other people, and we're going to have to find the best ways of doing that. War doesn't seem to be good enough. We've got to find other ways, and ultimately, by the year 2000, we must learn how to poison them in sufficient numbers in order to achieve what we want. Those are the words he was using.
Vaccines,
and he says,
chemtrails.
There are all kinds of poisons, including diseases, including vaccines, including geoengineering, the spraying in the skies that completely controlling our weather now, causing these violent storms, causing these unending, severely cold winters in certain limited places. All of those things are manufactured today, certainly in the United States. It's doing a great deal to destroy our food supply within the United States and other countries, but it's being used as a weapon against nations worldwide, and it's being administered partly through the United Nations, but certainly U.S. military has been involved, particularly the Air Force.
Yeah, let's come back to what's going on with Trump. They hate him. Do they not?
Well, of course, I'm fully convinced that he is a sworn enemy of the global elite. The plan is to go after them and to eliminate them, and he's taken some very important actions in that regard, even in the short time he's been in office. One of the most important was December 21st effective date, signed December 20th, the same day the tax cut finally passed the House for the second time. He signed that emergency order declaring it a national emergency related to human trafficking and related corruption.
And he re-upped that, supposedly, too.
Well, he has done some further things, but that has always been in force and in effect, to my knowledge. He said, most importantly, that for any person named in the exhibit to this emergency order, and we're going to be adding names as we go along and find evidence, any person named in the exhibit to this executive emergency order is to be regarded as having his assets frozen wherever they are worldwide. Every bank account, every financial account of any kind, every asset of real estate or any other asset is to be frozen until we make our claim as to whether this person is liable to us for damages of any kind or for the forfeiture of that property.
And that's been going on in the background. So that has been quietly going on, which is why you're seeing their minions in the mainstream media. They're bought and paid for propaganda shills. With the latest thing about Trump said he'd take information from a foreign government, he should be impeached. I mean, this is why they're freaking out. Am I wrong? Can you tell me why they're all freaking out right now? Why it seems to be reaching a much higher fevered pitch?
I think they're freaking out because the noose is getting a little bit, maybe slipping over the head on some of them, in terms of the prospects of their being tried for treason or for some other heinous crime. There are many of them, and the network, I'm sorry to say, goes far and deep throughout our society, in too many of our industries, certainly in the ones that have prominent public faces, and in that circumstance, many of them are doing all they can in order to make sure that this comes to an end as soon as possible. That is, a president who is actually a declared enemy of the forces that have put our presidents in office or killed them generation after generation back into the 19th century.
So this is a death match.
No question about it. And I'm encouraged. I certainly, compared to today and to where we were in 2012 and to 2016, right up to the point of the election, I frankly was telling those who would listen during 2016, I had considerable confidence that President Trump was going to prevail. I didn't care what the polls said. And it turned out, of course, that that wasn't particularly prescient, because there's just too many indications that our press lies to us in whatever ways are necessary to support the ruling elite, because they, in fact, are instruments of the ruling elite.
Yeah, they lie about the polls. Yeah. The polls are just big lies. I mean, Biden could get 200 people in a room in Iowa. You're talking about Donald Trump could put 20,000, rear ends in a stadium, and with 20,000 trying to get in. I mean, Biden could put 200 people in a room.
That's right, and that was so apparent in 2016. And
same with Hillary. Hillary.
It's hard to think that anybody would be a worse candidate than the 2016 candidate for the Democrats, but Biden might be, and his crimes might not be as hard to prove or as risky to prove as they were in 2016. So we'll see what happens in the future.
Well,
I'm optimistic.
Good. Good. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I got a lot of questions for you. You're a deep thinking guy, and I got a lot of questions. One of the things we said in the pre-interview, I was talking to you about this, the trade negotiations, and I said, is there more to the trade negotiations than just negotiating trade? And right out of your mouth said, he's negotiating the reset. Explain that.
Well, the situation on trade, the reason. Ordinarily, I would have been, say, a free trader and so forth and so on, but we have been completely drained of our national wealth, that is, the wealth of the people, over the last 20 years, since certainly the 90s. But our trade deals have put us into this well-known $850 billion a year current account deficit. That is, we're buying more from abroad than we're selling abroad by $850 billion. In that circumstance, you cannot have sound currency. Your wealth of your country is going out the door every year, and you're getting poorer and poorer. You just don't know it yet because they're flooding the economy with new paper money. It's not paper money. I shouldn't even call it that. It is a counterfeit for money. It's only paper. And it is, in fact, a promissory note. Everyone thinks that debt money means we go into debt when we borrow it, or the Fed or the Treasury borrows it from the Fed, and so therefore it's a debt. No, the reason it's called a debt currency is because the Fed owes us something of value. It's a promissory note. That's why it's called a Federal Reserve note. that they say, okay, we're giving you this and we're getting something back from value, such as a piece of land, or we're getting a treasury bond or something of the sort, all of which is going to give us value, and we promise to give you equal value in due course. Well, of course, the due course never comes around until that finally that value is zero, and so they wind up walking with all of the hard assets that they have bought over the decades with those promissory notes, and they've taken final possession and title to land and to minerals and to
houses.
You name it. That's correct.
Tell me about the reset. Tell me about. But let's get into the reset.
Okay.
What's Trump doing with the reset? Why is the trade really part of a financial debt reset?
Because it is essential to renegotiate these trade agreements in order to get a current account balance. That is, we've got to sell as much abroad as we buy from abroad. If we are spending $850 billion more a year, then if you go to a gold currency, you've got to send them $850 billion in gold every year. You would be broken within a year, in all reality, if you're talking real gold. So in the circumstance of what he is doing, the reason he's gone immediately for that is that in order to have a sound currency, you've got to balance the current account balance. The current account, meaning that once we sell as much abroad as we're buying, we don't have to ship any gold out. And we can have a gold-backed currency that in effect guarantees that any person who works and gets his dollar in his pocket can get a piece of gold in his pocket. That's not just a promissory note. The same day he works, or the way it was up until 33, you could go to any bank, present your dollars, and get a gold coin, $20.67.
That's right. That's right. That's why the $20 gold piece is 0.967. It's just a little less than an ounce because they had to make it for the 67 cents. And I was telling some kid in the store the other day, there was I had a silver quarter, just happened to have a silver quarter. I said, this is, you think this is a quarter? Yeah. I said, well, this is 90% silver. You know what this is worth right now with even the suppressed prices? It's worth about 2 1/4. What? It's a quarter. I know, that's what you said. It's a quarter, but this is 1963. So in 64 and earlier, you had a 90% silver a quarter. This is why they changed it. See, this is a little lesson for you. See, they changed the money because they're inflating it. So this is really 2 1/4.
And what's important to understand is that the real role of gold is a measuring stick. And the measuring stick quality of gold, that is, it is a measuring stick for the value of money. Gold does not change because it doesn't rust. It doesn't wear away.
Yeah.
It doesn't waste just as a passage of time. And so, and its use and the value people place on it, how hard it is to mine all of that, remains very, very stable compared to anything else.
Yeah. And you said something really important that there's only, in cash, in currency, dollars, quarters, nickels, 20s, hundreds. He says there's a little, I don't know, less than $2 trillion, but he said there's 30 trillion of commitments out there that the Fed has.
Well, this piece I wrote recently, it was talking about the financial information that the Federal Reserve puts out on its current website. It talks about its liabilities and its assets. And it actually, I was glad to see, it actually has an account as a liability showing the amount of liability for Federal Reserve notes outstanding, net. And it states an amount for that of, I think, about, as I recall, $3.2 billion, $1 trillion. Now, in recognizing what that is all about, it relates to the currency in circulation. They actually add an explanatory note on that amount, and in that circumstance, they say these are Federal Reserve notes in circulation, which amounts to the circulating currency of the United States. And they're required to be, in effect, collateralized in their full value by the regional banks to which these notes have been issued. In other words, they're fully collateralized, says the Fed, but they're only fully collateralized by the regional banks, not by the Federal Reserve itself. And the amount, actually, I think that
I have it right here. Debts owed by the Fed. This is in your piece. In the same Fed report cited above, the Fed shows total liabilities of $3.919 trillion, consisting primarily of $1.676 trillion for Fed notes outstanding net and $1.581 trillion in deposits owed to depository institutions. I guess add them together and you get what, a little more than $3 trillion. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and the amount of currency in circulation that they recognize is a little over $1.6 trillion.
That's right.
Which is about 51% of the total circulation that they talk about, or I'm sorry, the total monetary base that they put out. So for some reason, they credit only half of the monetary base as needing to be collateralized, when the monetary base is definitely dollars they put into circulation. And that's the starting place for the creation of money, because the banking system, ordinarily by common and approved banking practices, each bank will issue as many as $10 for the number of dollars they actually have from the Fed.
And what you're saying, there's a whole lot more debt out there than tens and twenties and dimes and nickels and quarters. So so I guess having cash has some advantage, having actual cash, if this whole system crashes. Is that right?
Well, the situation is that their collateralization would only be about 1.6 trillion, when the number of dollars in circulation would be more in the nature of at least 30 to 40 trillion dollars, and very likely much more than that. On the one hand, the good news is that the Fed actually recognized a liability for these notes they put out, that they have to somehow perform that. They're putting all the responsibility on the regional banks rather than on themselves. But the point is, they are promissory notes to us, and the Fed's assets declared are absolutely, completely insufficient to perform that.
No, they're bankrupt. They owe more than they can pay.
It's not even on the same meter. It's completely a sham operation, and just like every other fiat currency in history, the dollar, as presently designed, is designed to fail. It's designed to go to zero, and that's what's coming. What I think the president is doing is putting that off as much as he can, keeping the Fed from doing that, keeping it rolling until he can get this current account deficit down, so we can come out with a gold-backed currency. And as soon as we get the current account deficit more or less in balance, we can have a reset to a gold-backed currency that is stable and has a design to actually deliver value into the pockets of the people. That is, you hold your actual treasure rather than having to depend on some central government or some central bank to finally deliver you value when it comes to the showdown.
And let's fast forward. So this is why Donald Trump, he's talking about the G20 meeting coming up. And he's saying, Xi Jinping, if he meets me at the G20, great. If not, more tariffs. I mean, is that the thinking here, that he's going to balance this thing out, whether by hook or crook or war or whatever? The Chinese don't want to balance. They want this lopsided deal. Hey, we want our lopsided deal. Is this why Donald Trump is saying, if he meets Xi Jinping, the president, the dictator for life of China, great. If not, that's okay too. Is that why he's saying that?
Well, I'm not sure why he's saying it, but my interpretation of these events is that we're more likely to be closer to a deal on that than is being indicated presently. There is, from time to time, a need for deception as to what's going on. But I'm inclined to think that the Chinese are not likely to be in the position of wanting to wait to make a deal with the global cabal. I'm not convinced that the Chinese are any more interested in being allies and controlled by the global cabal than Trump is, or than Russia is. Again, remember that Russia was the one that took on the global cabal in the early 20th century and really paid dearly for it over the next 70 years. But they were able to throw the commies out. Unfortunately, many of them came here. I mean, again, I even hate to call them commies because communism and that ideology really has little to do with it. It really is a matter of service to the global cabal.
How about the Democrats now? I mean, I call them communist. I just listed off a Marxist, communist, New World Order, Satanist. They hate God. They're your God. They're trying to cut God out of everything. The communists, the Democrats, they like to kill babies. Have to kill those babies. They have to kill babies. They do. You can't be in the Democrat Party unless you're for abortion. Wow, no dissension.
Well,
That's absolutely true. But go ahead. I mean, the Democrats now, I want to kind of bring your knowledge into what's happening now. So the Democrats in this fevered pitch, you got Jerry Nadler trying to impeach the president, and Nancy Pelosi saying she wants him behind bars, and all the mainstream media, in a fevered pitch over this latest thing, which I think Trump's just winding them up, with George Stephanopoulos, who was a Clinton hack. About getting information. I want you to bring it back to what people are seeing now. Why are people seeing what they're seeing?
What we're seeing now is the desperate search for any straw in the wind that will give them some kind of hope of avoiding the fate that's coming to them, because I believe justice is coming to a great extent. It's arriving. Some people are finding it in different fatal ways. Sometimes those people are important witnesses who are being destroyed. But nevertheless, I think we have the evidence. I think we have the plan in place to eventually deliver up all of these major operatives and even the minor ones as well, and get them punished, and finally recover the wealth that has been stolen from every country over the past generations, at least. This is a monumentally historic event. It's never happened before, to my knowledge, certainly not in anything like so-called modern times. That is
the attack of the cabal.
Yeah, that's correct. Franklin Roosevelt in 33 wrote a letter saying that every administration since Andrew Jackson, who left office in 1832, every administration since then has been put into office by he called it the financial center in a certain part of our country, where we're talking about the cabal's outpost in Wall Street in New York. Clearly he was writing to the guy who had been the handler of Woodrow Wilson when the Fed was put in place at the time. And so that has been our problem. That is what happened with President Kennedy. He was elected as a cabal president. No question about it. His father was one of the operatives. But something changed. Maybe his military experience made him conclude that he had to act as president in order to stop this thing that he could see clearly had the country by the throat and was trying to have him by the throat. And of course, once he showed his hand about defeating the cabal or battling the cabal, they shot him to death. And of course, they've been completely not completely, but as far as the major media is concerned, they've been successful in denying uh, who did the killing of President Kennedy all these years.
And so Donald Trump is he's like Kennedy, but way more informed than Kennedy. He knew this. Trump has to win, otherwise his whole family ends up like Robert Kennedy and Teddy and the whole. So if Trump has to win, he knows he has to win. His whole family's on the line. Is that right?
Well, I believe not only is that right, but I believe the very essential thing about Donald Trump is that I'm fully convinced, had very important backing from factions, at least, of the U.S. military that have kept him safe. Otherwise, what I understand to be the numerous assassination attempts would surely have been successful probably years ago now with Donald Trump.
But they would kill him and his family. They would destroy everything. This is what I'm trying to get you to describe the fight. I mean, am I overstating it? Please describe that.
Well, they would destroy him and everyone connected with him and anybody who gave any support toward challenging the cabal. Those are the scores to settle if the cabal were to get back into full power. I mean, that sounds pretty awful, but I'm telling you, in 2016, the game plan was, I think, to make use of all of those black plastic coffins capable of holding multiple bodies that were being stored all across the United States.
And so, could this thing turn into a shooting civil war? Could this thing turn into that?
Well, it's very possible it would if anything happened to Donald Trump. But right now, I think there are very good chances that's not going to happen.
And what about? I'm sorry. I need to interrupt you here. What about the? You said something else that I wanted to get to. That the cabal wants to crash the economy. Please explain.
Well, they certainly have every game plan to do it. Remember, like the crash of '29, like the tech crash of 2000, 2002,
Yep.
like the 2008. Those are the most profitable times in the market. For the
Because
cabal.
they short the crap out of it and they make 20 years of investing in 20 days.
That's correct. And my book contains the evidence that not only was the crash of '29 completely crooked and contrived, it was also pre-planned and known among major figures who profited on it. And yet our two presidents, Hoover did nothing about it. FDR pretended to, but he created an agency, SEC, that is to this day nothing but a shield for the cabal's principal financial fraudsters.
That's right. Mark Koppelopoulos was his name. Markolopoulos? Can't remember his name.
Yeah.
Say his name. You know it?
Markopolis.
Yeah, Markopolis. He, it blew the whistle on the whole Bernie Madoff thing, and they were
for 8 years, and they wouldn't do anything about it.
They were watching porn. I mean, this is reported. They were watching porn, and nobody was fired.
Yeah, that's right.
But you think that they're going to try to do it again, and Trump is stopping them from crashing the economy. Am I wrong?
Well, it is a delicate game that's being played in order to keep things going, but he's doing it very well. And I think that's going to be the case until he is ready with the reset and gets his deal to balance our trade deficit. China is a very important aspect of that, and so it is important how much further that is delayed. But I'm still optimistic it's going to come around, and we're going to also, I think, in the near future, begin to see many more criminal prosecutions on the bad side of things, rather than these phony investigations against all the wrong people.
And gold is at 13. We're doing this last week. I think it hit 1350. Is that just the opening act, the warm up, the
well,
la 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 for gold?
I wouldn't even say it's the opening act.
What would
The
you
only
say?
reason the gold price is there, as I'm sure many of your listeners already know, um, is because the paper derivative market is
Are they
used to
going to
buy.
lose control of that?
I believe it's going to be ended. I think there needs to be a law passed that just says you cannot have pricing based on that derivative market if the derivative does not actually promise and have capability of delivering the metal.
Well, yeah,
So
I mean, they just lie. I mean, they're
yeah.
supposed to, then they dump stuff on the market they don't even own. But you think the pricing of gold is in the future, gold, silver, is going to go much higher if everything works out. The pricing is going to go much higher. Is that right?
Well, it's going to go to where the reset needs gold to be. Because the currency is going to have to come to a point where the currency is actually stable. And the reason for that, pardon me just a second.
Yeah. Hold on. There you go. Okay,
Sorry.
let's go back. So, one last question. Let's get that in there. So we're not going to edit this out. So gold's going to go. Gold and silver, you think, is going to go much higher because they've been suppressed for so long. You think to equalize the right amount of many dollars out there, trillions and trillions. You think the price of gold and silver will ultimately be much higher? Short answer.
Well, it would certainly be much higher in the Fed's dollar. If you have a reset currency, you're going to set the value of that currency related to gold in whatever works best for the transition and for the future of the country. So what that reset amounts to, basically what you'd be looking for would be a set of gold to its true value in terms of its relation to the value of labor on a day-to-day basis. It's those kind of circumstances. And once you get that in place, you have to take care of rebalancing the debts and that sort of thing. A very complex set of decision making. But once that takes place, I certainly think the key to your financial stability between this side of the chasm and the other side of the chasm is owning metals, owning gold and silver. Those are the things, it seems to me, that are most likely to hold their real value. And therefore, on the other side of the chasm of this chaos that happens when you declare that the present currency system is ended, what you want to try to do, and I think what the president is trying to do, is make the period of uncertainty as short as possible between the time the old currency dies and the new currency is in place.
And what's your time frame for this? What do you think? When do you think this is going to happen?
Well,
Before or after the 2020 election?
I think it's before.
Wow.
I don't know that we can make it that long, especially with the global cabal, trying to start a world war, or trying to have the currency failure right now. I mean, they have some capabilities of producing that kind of thing. They've certainly attacked every other country and destroyed their currency in the past when they've been, in effect, nobody in a position to oppose them. I can't tell you how effective the president's forces might be in keeping them from doing that. And I don't know, one of the key things is how much have they done to disarm and disable the Fed through this executive order relating to human trafficking? How much of their assets have they seized?
But they have done it. You think they have, and this is a clear plan to go after the Fed. This is why the president keeps talking about the Fed is, I just totally disagree with everything the Fed's doing. You're telling me this is why that this is going on, that there really is going to be a currency reset, which is a debt reset. That's coming, and it's coming before 2020. Is that right?
I think so. And the thing about changing the public discussion about the Fed, you got to get away from this thing of acting like the Fed is the gray-haired gentleman who is somehow pondering greatly about the well-being of this country. That is a completely false image of the Fed's role and has been from the very beginning. They've never been in that role, and you can't keep on talking about them as if they are just the epitome of veracity. You've got to start letting people know that this has been a criminal operation for the worst, most powerful, most evil forces in the world. From the very beginning, it was instigated in 1913. That's the point. It is a foreign outpost of a foreign occupying power of the United States, and we need to rid ourselves about it as soon as possible.
There you go. All right. Well, listen, that was quite a early Sunday release deal. I was excited to have you on. Classicalcapital.com, is that right?
That's correct.
Right. And there's articles on there. It's free. I don't even think you have any advertising on it. You just put this website up. You do have your book, The Fruits of Graft. It's on there. How much do you charge for this thing?
This is $25.
Well, man, it is
Let me tell you,
it's a Bible.
It's a quality made book. It has sewn binding, so it doesn't fall apart with glue.
Yeah,
because it is the
almost
only
600 pages.
It's the only book in existence, to my knowledge, that tells the real story, the true story about why we had the Great Depression and why 3 to 6 million, at least, Americans were starved to death on purpose, primarily with the functionary being the heads of the United States government, working for the cabal.
Well, with that, we'll leave it right there. I really appreciate Wayne Jett, you coming on. I'll put up the links in the after the interview section for you folks on YouTube. You can just click back to all links are on usawatchdog.com. After the interview, there'll be the classicalcapital.com. You can also find it on the homepage. Also, a link to how to buy the book. I'll put that on there as well. Wayne Jett, thank you for joining us today on usawatchdog.com.
Thank you so much for having me.